Ashurbanipal was born around 685 BC and became king after the death of his father, Esarhaddon, who ruled from 681 to 669 BC. Although Ashurbanipal's royal inscriptions portray his rise as the fulfillment of divine destiny, his accession was in fact politically complicated and set the stage for later internal conflict. He was likely Esarhaddon's fourth oldest son, younger than the first crown prince Sin-nadin-apli and his brothers Shamash-shum-ukin and Shamash-metu-ubalit. He also had an older sister named Serua-eterat and several younger siblings. When the crown prince Sin-nadin-apli died unexpectedly in 674 BC, it caused a crisis at the Assyrian court. Esarhaddon was determined to avoid the kind of succession turmoil that had followed his own father Sennacherib's assassination, an event caused by Esarhaddon's older brother Arda-mulissu, who had been passed over for the throne. To prevent similar instability, Esarhaddon quickly established a new succession plan. He named Ashurbanipal as heir to the Assyrian Empire and his eldest surviving son, Shamash-shum-ukin, as king of Babylon, the southern region of Mesopotamia. The two brothers were to rule as equals, though in practice Assyria remained dominant. Esarhaddon's third son, Shamash-metu-ubalit, was excluded from the succession, possibly because of illness or weakness. Historians have debated Esarhaddon's decision to divide authority between his sons, as it went against the traditional Assyrian principle of a single ruler. Some believe he did this to ease potential rivalry by giving Shamash-shum-ukin control over Babylon while reserving the imperial throne for Ashurbanipal. Others suggest that differences in their maternal ancestry played a role, with Ashurbanipal possibly being born of an Assyrian mother and Shamash-shum-ukin of a Babylonian one, making the latter less suitable for the Assyrian throne. However, both may have shared the same mother, Eshara-hamat, Esarhaddon's chief wife. In May 672 BC, both princes arrived together at the Assyrian capital of Nineveh for a grand ceremony attended by nobles, military leaders, and foreign envoys. It was likely at this time that Ashurbanipal received his royal name, Ashurbanipal, meaning Ashur is the creator of the air, replacing an earlier personal name that has not survived. Around this same period, he also married his future queen, Libali-sharat, marking the beginning of his path toward one of the most renowned reigns in Assyrian history. Ashurbanipal began his formal preparation for kingship after entering the House of Succession, the palace designated for the crown prince. There, he was trained in the arts expected of an Assyrian ruler: hunting, riding, archery, chariot driving, military tactics, scholarship, and the pursuit of wisdom. During the final years of his father Esarhaddon's life, the king's declining health forced much of the empire's administration onto his sons, Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shum-ukin. Surviving letters from this period show that Ashurbanipal oversaw the empire's intelligence network, gathering information from foreign lands and sending strategic reports to his father. When Esarhaddon died in 669 BC, Ashurbanipal ascended the Assyrian throne after serving as crown prince for only 3 years. He inherited what was likely the most powerful kingdom in the world at the time, but his position was not entirely secure. His grandmother Nakia, a formidable political figure, issued the Zakutu Treaty, which compelled members of the royal family, the nobility, and the entire empire to swear loyalty to Ashurbanipal. Despite the potential for unrest, there is no evidence of serious opposition to his accession. Shamash-shum-ukin, Ashurbanipal's elder brother, was crowned king of Babylon in the spring of the following year. As a gesture of reconciliation and legitimacy, Ashurbanipal returned the sacred statue of Marduk, which their grandfather Sennacherib had taken from Babylon 2 decades earlier. For 16 years, the two brothers ruled their respective realms without open conflict, though tensions persisted over the degree of Babylon's independence. Esarhaddon's succession plans had deliberately left the relationship between the brothers ambiguous. Ashurbanipal was recognized as the supreme ruler of the empire, and Shamash-Shum-Ukin was required to pledge loyalty to him. At the same time, Ashurbanipal was expected not to interfere in his brother's administration of Babylon. Over time, however, Ashurbanipal gradually consolidated authority in his own hands, perhaps fearing that allowing Babylon too much autonomy could enable his older brother to challenge his dominance and destabilize the In 671 BC, Ashurbanipal's father, Esarhaddon, achieved one of the greatest victories in Assyrian history by conquering Egypt and defeating the Kushite pharaoh Taharka, bringing Egypt under Assyrian control for the first time. This marked the peak of Assyrian territorial expansion, extending its empire farther than ever before. However, Assyrian rule in Egypt remained fragile. Taharka retreated south to Nubia and began plotting to regain his kingdom. Esarhaddon stationed Assyrian troops in major Egyptian cities and placed local nobles in charge as loyal vassal rulers. 2 years later, in 669 BC, Taharka led a major rebellion against Assyria. Esarhaddon departed from Nineveh to confront the uprising, but fell ill and died before reaching Egypt. During the transition of power to Ashurbanipal, many Egyptian vassals joined the revolt, attacking Assyrian garrisons. The rebels massacred the Assyrian troops stationed in Memphis, forcing Ashurbanipal to send an army to restore control. As described on the Rassam cylinder, one of the most complete chronicles of Ashurbanipal's reign, the Assyrian army gathered reinforcements and tribute from loyal vassals across the Levant, including Manasseh of Judah and various rulers from Cyprus. Marching into Egypt, the army defeated the rebels in a major battle at Karbanitu in Lower Egypt. Taharka and his allies fled from Memphis to Thebes and then to Nubia, while Assyria reoccupied Memphis. Several Egyptian nobles who had joined the rebellion, including Necho I, were taken to Assyria, forced to renew their oaths of loyalty, and, surprisingly, were allowed to return to their posts once they pledged allegiance to Ashurbanipal. After Taharka's death in 664 BC, his nephew Tantamani proclaimed himself pharaoh, seized Thebes, and marched north toward Memphis. Ashurbanipal once again sent an Assyrian army, and according to his records, Tantamani retreated south as soon as the Assyrians entered Egypt. In retaliation for repeated uprisings, the Assyrians looted Thebes in one of the most devastating sackings in the city's history. The destruction was so severe that Thebes never fully recovered, although the diplomatic efforts of its governor, Mentumhat, prevented its total annihilation. The Assyrian army returned to Nineveh with immense spoils, parading the treasures of Thebes through the streets, and many of these artifacts were later incorporated into Ashurbanipal's royal projects. Meanwhile, Ashurbanipal faced new challenges in the east. In 665 BC, the Elamite king Urtak, who had maintained peaceful relations with Esarhaddon, suddenly invaded Babylonia. The invasion failed, and Urtak died soon afterward. His successor, Tumen, seized the throne by killing his rivals, while 3 of Urtak's sons fled to Assyria, where Ashurbanipal granted them refuge despite Tumen's demands for their return. Following this brief Elamite war, Ashurbanipal dealt with several internal revolts. One was led by Bel-Ikisha, the chief of the Gambulians, an Aramean tribe in Babylonia, who had been implicated in supporting the Elamite attack. Ashurbanipal ordered Nabu-Usabsi, the governor of Uruk, to suppress the rebellion. Bel-Ikisha was soon killed by a wild boar, ending the uprising, and his son Dunanu surrendered 2 years later. Peace with Elam did not last long. In 653 BC, King Tumen launched another invasion of Babylonia. Shamash-shum-ukin, Ashurbanipal's brother and the king of Babylon, lacked a strong army and had to rely on Assyrian aid. Ashurbanipal's forces advanced south, securing the city of Der before confronting Tumen near Susa. The decisive engagement, known as the Battle of Ulai, ended in a crushing Assyrian victory, aided by desertions among the Elamite troops. Tumen and his vassal, Shutruk-Nahunte of Hidalu, were both killed in battle. Afterward, Ashurbanipal installed 2 of Urtak's sons as client kings, Umanagash in Susa and Madaktu, and Tamaritu Thermors in Hidalu. This arrangement weakened Elam's unity and reduced its ability to threaten Assyria again. In his inscriptions, Ashurbanipal described the victory in dramatic terms, boasting that he had swept through Elam like a violent storm, decapitated Tumen, and filled the plains of Susa with enemy corpses until their blood turned the waters of the Ulai River red. During the same campaign, Dunanu of the Gambulians joined the Elamites, but was captured with his family and executed. His tribe was brutally punished. Their capital, Shapabal, was flooded, and its inhabitants slaughtered. To re-establish order, Ashurbanipal appointed a new leader, Rimutu, as chief of the Gambulians after he agreed to pay substantial tribute to the Assyrian crown. The Cimmerians, a nomadic Indo-European people who lived in the southern Caucasus north of Assyria, had previously invaded Assyrian territory during the reign of Ashurbanipal's father, Esarhaddon. After being defeated by the Assyrians, the Cimmerians redirected their attacks westward into Lydia, a kingdom in western Anatolia ruled by King Gyges. According to tradition, Gyges received a divine message from the Assyrian god Ashur in a dream, urging him to seek an alliance with Assyria. Unfamiliar with Lydia's existence, the Assyrians established contact through interpreters, and together the two powers managed to repel the Cimmerian invasion around 665 BC. 2 Cimmerian leaders were captured and brought to Nineveh, where they were imprisoned, and large quantities of spoils were claimed by Ashurbanipal's forces. The exact extent of Assyrian involvement in this campaign remains uncertain, but it appears that Gyges later grew dissatisfied with the level of support he received. Around 12 years after the alliance was formed, he abandoned his ties with Assyria and allied himself with Egypt, which had begun to act independently. In response, Ashurbanipal cursed Gyges, and when Lydia was later overrun by its enemies around 652 to 650 BC, there was great rejoicing in Assyria. During the same period, while the Assyrian army was campaigning in Elam, a coalition of Persians, Cimmerians, and Medes advanced on Nineveh and reached its very walls. To confront this threat, Ashurbanipal called upon his Scythian allies, who joined the Assyrian forces in defeating the invading army. The Median king Phraortes is often believed to have been killed during the battle, although the historical evidence is limited, and some scholars suggest his death may have occurred in a later conflict during the reign of one of Ashurbanipal's successors. After Gyges' death around 652 BC, his son Ardys succeeded him on the Lydian throne. By this time, the Scythians had displaced the Cimmerians from their original homeland, prompting the Cimmerians to invade Lydia once more and capture the kingdom. Following his father's example, Ardi sent an appeal to Ashurbanipal, saying, "You cursed my father and disaster struck him. Now bless me, your humble servant, and I will bear your yoke." It remains unclear whether any Assyrian support ever arrived, but Lydia eventually managed to free itself from Sumerian control. However, the Sumerians were not fully expelled from the region until the reign of Ardis's grandson, Aliates, several decades later. Although Esarhaddon's inscriptions suggest that Shamash-shum-ukin was intended to rule all of Babylonia, surviving evidence indicates that his authority was limited mainly to Babylon and its nearby regions. The governors of other major cities such as Nippur, Uruk, and Ur, as well as the rulers of the southern marshlands, ignored his rule and instead recognized Ashurbanipal as their sovereign. Despite this unequal arrangement, Shamash-shum-ukin initially regarded his younger brother positively and saw him as an equal partner in power. In his letters, he addressed Ashurbanipal simply as "my brother," unlike the more formal tone he used for their father, Esarhaddon. However, no responses from Ashurbanipal survive, likely because the Assyrian king relied on his vast network of informants rather than direct correspondence. By the 650s BC, Shamash-shum-ukin's attitude toward Ashurbanipal had deteriorated sharply. His resentment grew due to Ashurbanipal's increasing interference in Babylonian affairs, his delays in providing assistance when needed, and the overall inequality of their political relationship. A letter from Zakir, a courtier at Shamash-shum-ukin's court, reports that visitors from the Sea Land had publicly criticized Ashurbanipal, calling him unworthy of kingship. Though angered, Shamash-shum-ukin and his governor, Ubaru, chose not to punish them. Seeking independence from Assyrian control, Shamash-shum-ukin rebelled in 652 BC. Later Babylonian and Aramaic legends claim that their sister, Serua-Eterat, tried to mediate between the brothers but disappeared into self-imposed exile after the conflict erupted. The civil war lasted for 3 years. Babylonian resentment toward Assyrian rule and the promise of Elamite support encouraged the uprising. Shamash-shum-ukin appealed to the citizens of Babylon to join his cause, claiming that Ashurbanipal sought to disgrace their nation. His rebellion quickly spread throughout southern Mesopotamia. Ashurbanipal, in his royal inscriptions, portrayed his brother as a traitor who had forgotten his kindness and plotted against him despite being given wealth, troops, and authority. According to these records, Shamash-shum-ukin succeeded in forming a strong coalition of enemies against Assyria. His allies included the Chaldeans, Arameans, and other Babylonian peoples, as well as the Elamites and possibly the kings of Gutium, Amurru, and Meluha. Elamite aid came under the command of Undash, son of the former king Tumen, after Shamash-shum-ukin sent lavish gifts to secure their support. For 2 years, battles raged across Babylonia, with shifting alliances and betrayals on both sides. The conflict became chaotic, as even local leaders frequently changed sides. Among the most notorious of these was Nabu-bel-shumati, a southern governor whose repeated treachery infuriated Ashurbanipal. Despite his powerful alliance, Shamash-shum-ukin was eventually overwhelmed. By 650 BC, Ashurbanipal's armies had besieged major cities, including Sippar, Borsippa, Kuta, and Babylon itself. The siege led to widespread famine, and some reports claim that desperate citizens resorted to cannibalism. After 2 years, Babylon fell in 648 BC. The Assyrians looted the city extensively, and Ashurbanipal's inscriptions describe brutal retribution, claiming that the bodies of his enemies were fed to animals, and that the streets ran with blood. A massive fire swept through the city during its fall. Shamash-shum-ukin is traditionally believed to have taken his own life, possibly by setting fire to himself and his palace, though other sources merely state that he met a cruel death and was consumed by fire. He may have been executed or killed in the chaos, but Assyrian scribes avoided specifying this, as fratricide was forbidden by Assyrian law. After the rebellion, Ashurbanipal installed a new vassal king, Kandalanu, to rule Babylon. Very little is known about him, and his authority appears to have been largely symbolic. The city of Nippur was transformed into a fortified Assyrian stronghold. Kandalanu may have been another of Ashurbanipal's brothers, or a Babylonian noble who had supported him during the war, but real power remained firmly in Ashurbanipal's hands. The civil war, though ending in Assyrian victory, was one of the darkest chapters of Ashurbanipal's reign. It drained Assyria's resources, weakened its stability, and marked the beginning of the empire's decline. The destruction of Babylon, the second major sack of the city in 30 years, deepened resentment across southern Mesopotamia and contributed to future revolts, including the uprising led by Nabopolassar that eventually created the Neo-Babylonian Empire and brought about the final fall of Assyria. The Elamite alliance with Shamash-shum-ukin led to renewed conflict with Assyria. After the defeat of Elamite forces at Deir, internal struggles erupted within Elam. The ruler Umanagash was overthrown by Tamaritu II, who briefly seized the throne before being deposed in another revolt. His successor, Inda-bibi, was murdered after refusing to hand over anti-Assyrian rebels to Ashurbanipal. Humban-Haltash III then became king, but he, too, could not control the situation as Elamite factions continued to support Nabu-bel-Shumati. When Humban-Haltash ignored Assyrian demands, Ashurbanipal invaded Elam again in 647 BC. The invasion devastated the country. Humban-Haltash fled into the mountains, while Ashurbanipal's army razed cities and forced local rulers to pay tribute to Assyria. Even distant kingdoms such as Parswa, possibly an early forerunner of the Persian Empire, submitted to Ashurbanipal. Its king, Cyrus, was compelled to send his son as a hostage. In 646 BC, Ashurbanipal launched a final campaign that utterly destroyed Elam. His armies captured and sacked Susa, the ancient Elamite capital. The Assyrians desecrated royal tombs, looted temples, carried off statues of the gods, and sowed salt into the land to ensure it could not recover. In his own records, Ashurbanipal described how he reduced Elam's temples and cities to ashes, burned sacred groves, and scattered the bones of Elamite kings under the sun. Thousands of Elamites were killed or deported, and entire settlements were wiped from the map. Though Elam survived for a short while as a weakened state, it never recovered from this destruction. Its final rulers were soon overthrown, and the region disappeared from history. Modern historians often describe Ashurbanipal's campaign against Elam as an act of total annihilation, a deliberate attempt to erase an ancient civilization from existence. Throughout Ashurbanipal's reign, Assyrian influence in the Levant and other Western territories was occasionally challenged by Arab tribal confederations who raided Assyrian lands and disrupted trade routes. The Assyrians frequently intervened, deposing troublesome chiefs and installing more compliant rulers. Ashurbanipal personally oversaw two major campaigns against the Arabs, though their exact order and chronology remain unclear. These wars were described in unusually extensive detail in his own inscriptions, even though they have received limited attention from modern historians. The First Arabian Campaign took place before the Civil War with Shamash-Shum-Ukin and was directed mainly against the Kedarite tribes. According to an inscription from 649 BC, Yauta, son of Hazael, king of the Kedarites, joined forces with another Arab ruler, Amul-ad-Din, and attacked the western provinces of the Assyrian Empire. Ashurbanipal's army, aided by Moabite allies under Kamashalta, defeated the rebels. Amul-ad-Din was captured and sent in chains to Assyria, while Yauta escaped. In his place, a loyal chief named Abiyate was appointed as king of the Kedarites. Later versions of Ashurbanipal's account expanded the story to include the defeat of an Arab queen named Adia and to link Yauta's rebellion with the wider Assyrian civil war, implying that Arab raids were encouraged by instability within the empire. In every version, the Assyrians thoroughly plundered Kedarite territory once the rebellion was suppressed. Some Arab rulers, including Abiyate and his brother Aya-Amu, later supported Shamash-Shum-Ukin in his revolt against Assyria. Because Ashurbanipal was preoccupied with the war in Elam, they initially escaped punishment and stopped paying tribute. Their continued raids against Assyrian settlements forced the empire to launch a second major campaign. Ashurbanipal's army marched across Syria and into Arabia, seizing Damascus and then advancing southward. Abiyate was captured, and the forces of other Arab leaders, including Usho and Akko, were defeated. The harsh desert terrain made the campaign difficult, and the Assyrians suffered considerable hardship. The Nabateans, who had previously been Assyrian allies, were also defeated in this conflict, though the reasons for their change of allegiance are unknown. In the final version of the royal inscriptions, Ashurbanipal personally claimed credit for these victories, declaring them part of his 9th campaign. He described how Uiate, possibly the same as Yauta, was captured and paraded through Nineveh, harnessed to the royal chariot like a beast of burden, while Aya-Amu was flayed alive. The campaign's spoils were so abundant that they reportedly caused inflation within Assyria and famine across Arabia. Despite their brutality and success, these campaigns achieved little lasting benefit, consuming vast resources while failing to secure Assyrian control over Arabia. The closing years of Ashurbanipal's reign are poorly documented and clouded by uncertainty. After 649 BC, the detailed year-by-year records that characterized earlier reigns ceased, suggesting the onset of serious internal instability. Only 2 inscriptions from after 639 BC are known, hinting at a widening divide between the king and the traditional Assyrian elite. Ashurbanipal increasingly favored eunuchs for senior posts over noblemen, which alienated the aristocracy. He even elevated Bulutu, his chief singer, to the prestigious position of eponym, a controversial and unprecedented act. Later scholars have compared this period to later Greek depictions of Sardanapalus, a legendary decadent ruler based on Ashurbanipal himself. In one of his final inscriptions, the aging king lamented the state of his empire and his own failing health, writing that he could no longer quell strife within his land or discord within his family. He spoke of being crushed by both physical and mental illness, and of facing death with sorrow and regret. By the end of his reign, Assyria's grip on its far-flung territories had weakened considerably. The southern Levant was lost, and Egypt, once under firm Assyrian rule, had regained full independence under Psamtik I, the son of Necho I, who had been raised at the Assyrian court. Though Psamtik initially ruled as a loyal vassal, he gradually unified Egypt by 656 BC and established a prosperous and independent dynasty. Nonetheless, Egypt remained an ally of Assyria, sending troops to assist the empire during its final struggles against the Medes and Babylonians decades later. Ashurbanipal's death is not precisely dated. Inscriptions by his son and successor, Ashur-etil-ilani, indicate that he died peacefully, likely of natural causes. The last contemporary record of him alive is a legal document from Nippur dated to 631 BC. While later Babylonian tradition claimed he ruled until 627 BC, this is contradicted by the chronology of his successors, making 631 BC the most probable date of his death. Ashurbanipal was succeeded by Ashur-etil-ilani, who followed his father's example by dividing authority within the royal family. His brother, Sin-shar-ishkun, was granted command of Nippur and was designated to inherit Babylon after the death of the vassal king Kandalanu. Some historians have proposed that Ashurbanipal's reign extended until 627 BC, or that he ruled Babylon under the name Kandalanu. But these theories conflict with contemporary evidence. Babylonian records treat the two figures as separate individuals, and no Assyrian king before or after Ashurbanipal ever adopted an alternate royal name for Babylon. By 631 BC, the once mighty Assyrian Empire was already showing clear signs of decline, and within a generation of Ashurbanipal's death, it would collapse entirely under the combined assault of the Babylonians and Medes.